Good morning, everybody. We missed you yesterday. Been traveling a lot. Actually, want to tell you something about our travels. But I'll start with the Dvar Torah. I mean, the Simcha was beautiful. Spending time with family is always a special thing. But we're on to Parshat Chukas and Balak, which is a double portion. And there's so many things to speak about that I'm going to want to tell you. But I wanted to start with something that always bothered me more than everything. And it's such a troubling part of this week's Torah portion, and it's so discussed by the commentaries. And I wanted to give you some thoughts about it. You know, the Jews are on the cusp of going into the land of Israel. They already spent 40 years in the desert. They were punished. And they're about to go on, and Miriam passes away. Miriam passes away, and suddenly the Jews have no water again, which is a discussion in its own. What's Miriam's connection to the water? Why was there a well in the honor of Miriam? But in either case, the Jews have no water. And the Jews turn to Moses and they say, please, we can't anymore. And Moses turns to God, and he says, God, soon they're going to kill me. What do I do? And God says, speak to this stone and it will give out water. Take your stick, speak to the stone, and it will give out water. Moses and Aaron go, and God tells them both to go. They go. They hit the stone twice, and the stone gives out water. Suddenly God tells them, because you hit the stone and you didn't speak to the stone as I told you, you're going to be punished and you're not going to go into the land of Israel. Imagine. Moses, the greatest leader that ever lived, the one who loved and gave his life for the Jewish people, the one who loved the land of Israel so much. In fact, later on in Deuteronomy, Moses speaks about how he begged God 575 times. He pleaded, he cried. He said, please let me go into the land of Israel. This Moses, because he hit the rock and didn't speak to the rock, God says you can never go into the land of Israel. What's going on? Why such a harsh punishment? First of all, there's a lot of questions here. If God told Moses to speak to the rock, why did he hit it? Secondly, what's the difference really if you hit it or you speak to it? Who cares? Thirdly, 40 years ago, God tells Moses to hit the rock. So why then did he tell him to hit it? And now, did he tell him to speak to it? And most importantly, why did Moses have to hit the rock twice? Why couldn't he hit the rock just once? And you hit the rock once and that's it. And the answer I want to give you, the commentaries speak about this. It's one of the most spoken about parts of the Torah. All the commentaries question about it. There's 13 different interpretations. But today I want to give you one, and maybe if we get a chance on another day, I'll give you another one. I want to tell you something very powerful that Chassidus tells us about this. And then I want to connect it to a story that happened to me this past week, driving to New York, and something that's really bothering me about tomorrow. So Chassidus says like this. You see, Moses was the leader who took the Jewish people out of the land of Egypt. In the land of Egypt, the Jewish people were slaves. They were slaves for over 200 years. They suffered tremendously. They couldn't have day or night. They were told when to get up, when to go to sleep. They were told how many bricks to make, if they should make the cement or just build the pyramids. They were told when they could be with their wives, when they couldn't. They were given the food they could eat. They were slaves. They were hardened slaves who were beaten and hurt constantly. And then, 40 years later, they were a generation who spent 40 years in the desert working, studying under Moses, his tutelage, embraced in the love and radiance of God. The rabbis tell us that sometimes a rock is only a metaphor for a human being. What does that mean? You see, this is a story. When the Jewish people came at a rock, hitting a rock and speaking to the rock is two different ways of education. When the Jews just came out of Egypt, they were a hardened generation who were slaves, who had a slave mentality. And therefore, when God spoke to Moses then, he says, you need to hit the rock. What does it mean? You need to hit the rock? That generation needed a Moses who couldn't just speak to them gently, who couldn't just explain things to them. He had to tell them what they had to do. The discussion, the language, the direction Moses gave the generation was totally different. God tells Moses 40 years early, when you're dealing generation of slaves who are hardened, who didn't have the time to be educated, who didn't have the time to study in the embrace of God under the guidance of Moses, then you need to hit the rock. God tells Moses, you need to speak to them strongly. You can't give them options. You can't tell them either this or that. You can't tell them, listen, let me explain you what's happening. They only know one way. You got to tell them what the thing is. Do this or do that. And if they don't, then you have to force them to do it. That's the only way. But 40 years later was a different generation. God looks at Moses and he says, Moses, this is a new generation. These are young children who are more gentle, more sensitive, more learned, more understanding. You can't hit this rock. You can't tell them what to do. You need to explain them what they need to do. You need to explain them why they have to do it. Your relationship, your discussion, your education of this generation has to be totally different. God says you need to take the stick with you, but you need to speak to the rock. But what was the problem? Moses was so connected to his generation. Moses was so connected to the generation he shepherded for 40 years that he couldn't transform to that type of relationship where he could educate, where he could nurture, where he could explain as opposed to tell. Moses was the leader so connected to his generation that when God saw, God told him, speak to the stone, and he hit it anyways. God says, it's not a punishment. It wasn't a punishment for Moses. God says, Moses, you're a leader for this generation. You can't adopt a new generation. They need a new leader. They need a leader like Joshua, who was under your nurture and guidance for 40 years, didn't leave your tent and studied under you. Joshua is the one who has to nurture, who has to guide, who has to lead the next generation. Because you, Moses, you know how to hit the stick. Joshua is the one who could speak with the stick. And that's the thing also. You see, when Moses hit the stick, hit the rock, he had to hit it twice. Because sometimes when you tell people, when you force them to have to do it, you have to tell them again and again. Once is not enough. But when you explain, when you inspire, when you lead a new generation that understands, that's educated, that's nurtured, then everything is different. Then you could speak, and then you could speak to the stone and let water flow out of it. Water representing Torah and spirituality and holiness. And the same thing is with education today. Sometimes, in the old days when we were kids, teachers were rougher, the way they spoke to us, the way they treated us. Today we realize the new generation, to our children, they're gentle, they're sensitive. They need to be spoken to be able to understand where they have to go and what they have to do. I want to tell you a story that happened to me on Wednesday. It's a crazy story, but a real story. We were driving with our children to New York. And thank God I'm blessed with having 10 children. And 9 of the children were in the car. So we have a Ford Transit, that's a 15-passenger, that we don't use very often, but we use it when we need to drive the whole family. It's a new car, 2015, drives great. And we packed up the car, we were all going to New York, and we're on the 84 driving, and suddenly I see that I'm on cruise going 70 miles per hour, and I see it starts slowing down. So I press again, and it's slowing down again. And then I look behind me, and I see the smoke coming out of the car. There's tons of smoke coming out of the car. So I pull over, I was in the left lanes, I pull over immediately to the side, on the shoulder, and I get out of the car, I see the smoke, I immediately shut the car, and I check, I look under, I don't see anything dripping, there's not. So I go back into the car, I say maybe it was smoke from a different car, maybe the car's fine, I try to start the car doesn't start. Guess what, I'm stuck on the 84, it's 90 degrees and humid, my car's not starting, it's dangerous, I had 9 kids in the car, what am I gonna do? Within 2 minutes, a state trooper pulls over and he asks me what's going on, and I tell him, he takes out my manual, he tries to help me, he says, sometimes it could be this, maybe you flooded the engine, start it, stop it, it doesn't work, he says, check this, he opens up the hood, he looks a little, another trooper comes, they can't figure it out. What am I gonna do? So I said, I'll try to call AAA. And then the officers, two gentle souls, look at me and they say, Rabbi, you have 9 kids in this car. This is dangerous. We can't let you be on the highway here. We're going to do something we don't do often, but we have to do it. I said, what? He said, give us a few minutes. Suddenly 6 cruisers pull over, and they tell me we're going to slowly close the highway. We're going to flip around to the next exit, and what we do is each car moves out one lane, and we stop, and we're going to close the entire highway. And this officer, who is right here, he's going to slowly, you're going to put your car into neutral, he's going to push you off the highway, we're going to get you into, there's a McDonald's right there, we're going to put you into the parking lot, and there you'll call AAA, your kids can go out, it's safe. I was amazed, I never heard of this. So my kids are in the car, I get into, he says, wait, I get into neutral, I'm on the brakes, suddenly I see all the cars come, the highway that was so busy, the 84, it's 84 going to New York, there's hundreds of cars, is stopped, there's not a car, and all I see is lined up police cars, and this guy slowly pushes me off the highway, and drops me into the parking lot. He says, Rabbi, is everything okay? What else can I get you? How can I help you? 2 of the cars, they stop the traffic even off the highway. They get me into the parking lot. They take my license. They go into McDonald's. They say, listen, this guy could park in the handicap. They pushed me to first space because they didn't want to move any further. Don't worry, let him be here as long as he could be here. That ends the story with the police officer. To be honest, I was so confused. I didn't even get their names to thank them. It was terrible. But it happened. Just to continue the story, so you know the full scope of the story, as I'm stopped on the highway, I get a call from one of my friends who's the Chabad rabbi in Sudbury. And he keeps on calling me and calling me. I said, listen, it's the wrong time. I keep on hanging up. I'm dealing with a crisis. Finally, I see that on the other side of the highway, he pulled over. He happened to be right behind me. And he says, how can I help you? So it turns out he took 3 of my kids to New York, where we were going. And then I sat on the highway. What am I going to do? I'm sitting here in the highway. My car has to be towed. It's going to have to be fixed. I have a family. I'm going in to visit my parents and a family simcha. So I was 15 minutes from Glastonbury. And my friend is the Chabad rabbi in Glastonbury. He's an amazing friend of mine from all the way back in yeshiva. We were in class together, same age, same class. I know his kids. My kids know his kids. We're friends. I give him a call. He says, Mendy, don't worry. Within 10 minutes, he was over. He drove over with his 15 passenger. I called AAA. I towed the car to his mechanic, and he took us to our home. He made an amazing dinner for all my kids, and then he gave me his 15 passenger and says, take it into New York. Don't worry. We'll figure it out when you come back. Meanwhile, my Ford had a lot of issues. The whole turbo engine is gone, and it's sitting at a Ford specialist now, and I'm working it out with a warranty, and I don't even know when I'll have it back. But last night, I dropped this car back home. I went home in another car, and here I am to tell the end of the story. A miracle. I just think if I didn't have a friend there, if the police didn't help me, what would happen? Why do I say this? And why do I speak about this compared to what's going on? Tomorrow night in Brookline, there's a discussion going on, something that pains me very deeply. I never speak politics here, but I don't think this is politics. They want to cut and defund, or not defund, but they want to cut the budget drastically of the Brookline police. And this bothers me very much. This whole discussion about defunding the police or not. I think we all agree that police need reform and that we have to be better at defusing issues without having a crisis where someone gets killed. We have to get rid of all those that are either racist or brutal or any minority, or just people that use force when they don't need to. There's no question about that. But the truth is that for that, the police need more money, not less money. Because they have to train them better. They need more money for training to deal with situations more. And the truth is that most of the police are amazing people. Here's a story where the officers who didn't know me, obviously, and the situation could have been very different. They could have just sat one cruiser there and waited for AAA for 2 hours. But they were so kind to take care of me. And to go and cut the police forces funding that they need to help us and protect us is terrible. But there's something even more here. You see, 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago in Massachusetts, we had the terrible misfortune where 2 Chabad centers were tried to put on a blaze by an arsonist who tried to light them on fire while families were living there. I live in a home on the main drag. Everyone knows I'm a rabbi. We have a shul here. The police are always so kind and trying to help us. They have an officer dedicated to all the churches and synagogues to make sure there's no hate, there's no anti-Semitism, there's no racism, there's no bigotry. If the funds are cut for the police, you know what's going to happen? We're not going to have police to be able to watch us, to be able to protect us. And I say this here because I need each one of you who live in Brookline to call your selectmen and tell them we want reform. But we don't want you to cut the budget. We want you to make sure they're trained better. And I think about the story of Moses. Moses hit the rock. He didn't speak to the rock. And that was the problem. And that's why God said, you're not ready for the new generation. We don't need to defund police or cut their budget. We need to speak to them. We don't need to hit them. We need to train them better. These are people that sacrifice their life every day to protect each and every one of us in a way that we could be safe, that we could be cared for, that we could be protected. Of course we need to reform, but not by hitting them, by speaking to them. Increase their funding. Get better reform done. Besides the fact that the police in Brooklyn are amazing. And I've seen it time and time again in crisis for people in our community of all color, of all race, of all religion, that they've been there in the most understanding way. So let's understand this in our whole discussion in America. We're busy hitting each other with sticks. We're busy fighting and killing. We need to tone down the language. We need to start speaking to the stone, speaking to the hearts of people, not hitting them, not forcing them. We need to use language that's soft, that's gentle. We need to use our rationale and not speak just from the heart and say things that don't make sense and that are dangerous for our society. I plead with you, if you live in Brookline, call your selectmen. And in any case, when it comes to our children, when it comes to people who think otherwise than us, when it comes to our society, let's learn from the mistake that Moses made. Let's not hit the rock, let's speak to it. My friends, have a good day. I'll see you tomorrow.